I'm Lieutenant Colonel Hannah Rowan, 43 years old, and I built my career from a small Midwestern town where ambition had a ceiling, and I refused to stay under it. For years, I sent money home, covered bills, and tried to make my parents proud, even when they called my job secretary work in uniform. But when they mocked me walking out of base command, and a Black Hawk landed right in front of them, its pilot saluting and calling Reaper Zero, ma'am, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been underestimated by the very people you were fighting for? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground and earn respect the hard way, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries, respect, and becoming who they said you couldn't be. What happened next might surprise you. I grew up in a town where ambition had a ceiling low, practical, and meant for men. My father, Harold Rowan, fixed engines at Midwestern Motors for 30 years. My mother, Diana, kept the books at a grain elevator downtown. They were good people, steady people, the kind who believed in hard work and stayed in their lane. But their lane was narrow, and I was never built to fit inside it. I was 7 when I saw my first C-130 fly over our county fair. The sound hit my chest before I saw it, a deep, rattling thunder that made the Ferris wheel shake. When it passed overhead, I couldn't look away. My father laughed and said it was just cargo, nothing special. But I felt something lock into place inside me, a certainty that had no words yet. I wanted to be up there. I wanted to be the one making that sound happen. By middle school, I was building model jets in our garage, spreading parts across old newspapers, reading manuals I'd ordered from hobby catalogs. My mother would glance at the tiny fuselages and say, "You're so detail-oriented, Hannah. You'd make a great secretary someday." She meant it as a compliment. My father would ruffle my hair and say, "Or a teacher. Teachers get summers off." Neither of them asked what I wanted. They simply assumed the path I'd take would be practical, local, and appropriate for a girl from a family like ours. In high school, I joined ROTC. I won an essay contest on air mobility logistics and got a certificate signed by a brigadier general. I brought it home, framed, and set it on the kitchen table during dinner. My father glanced at it, then back at his meatloaf. "That's nice, honey. Pass the salt." My mother put it on the fridge for a week, then moved it to a drawer to make room for a grocery list. I didn't say anything. I just kept working. I applied to State University on an ROTC scholarship, majored in logistics, and commissioned as a second lieutenant the day after graduation. I was 22 years old, standing in dress blues, right hand raised, swearing an oath to support and defend the Constitution. My parents sat in the back row. Afterward, my mother hugged me and said, "We're so proud. You look so professional." My father shook my hand and said, "Now you've got a government job. That's stable. Good benefits." Neither of them mentioned the rank on my shoulder or what it meant. When I told them I'd be stationed at Langley for intelligence operations, my mother told her friends I was doing administrative work for the Air Force. When I corrected her gently, the first few times, she waved me off. "It's all the same to them, sweetie. They don't know the difference." But it wasn't all the same. I was briefing senior officers on airfield security assessments. I was coordinating with joint task forces. I was learning to read satellite imagery and identify supply chain vulnerabilities in hostile airspace. I wasn't filing papers. I was building a career in a world they couldn't see and didn't care to understand. Still, I sent money home. Every month, $200, sometimes more if they needed it. My father's truck broke down, I covered the repair. My mother's dental work wasn't covered by insurance. I paid the bill. I handled their property taxes 1 year when they got behind. They thanked me, but it always came with a strange distance, as if the money arrived from some vague, generous source rather than from their daughter's salary. Once, my father joked, "Guess that desk job pays pretty well." I didn't correct him. I was tired of correcting him. By my mid-20s, I'd earned my flight operations certification and started working joint intelligence briefings with Army and Navy units. I learned to write mission summaries that could shift entire operational priorities. I learned to stay calm in rooms full of colonels and captains who expected precision, clarity, and no excuses. I learned that respect wasn't given, it was demonstrated, repeatedly, until it became undeniable. But none of that translated to my parents. When I came home in uniform, my father would say, "You really wear that thing everywhere?" My mother would ask if I'd met any nice men on base. They looked at me and saw a girl in a costume, playing dress-up in a world they didn't respect. The breaking point started small. My cousin Eli joined the county sheriff's department. He was 24, fresh out of the academy, and suddenly my parents couldn't stop talking about him. "Eli made 2 arrests this week," my father would say, voice full of pride. "Real police work." My mother would add, "He's keeping people safe." "That's a hero's job." I sat across from them at Sunday dinners, listening, saying nothing. I had just returned from a 3-week deployment supporting reconnaissance operations in Eastern Europe. I couldn't talk about the details, but I had flown in a Black Hawk over contested borders, coordinated intelligence transfers between allied forces, and briefed a 2-star general on enemy movement patterns. I came home exhausted, proud, and entirely invisible. One evening, my mother called to tell me Eli had been featured in the local paper. She read the article aloud, her voice bright with excitement. When she finished, she said, "Isn't that wonderful? He's really making a difference." I asked if she'd seen the commendation I'd sent her, a certificate for exceptional performance in joint operations. She paused. "Oh, yes, I think I put that somewhere. You know how it is, Hannah. We're just so proud of both of you." But the weight in her voice was different when she talked about Eli. He was the hero. I was the footnote. I stopped calling as often. I still sent money, but I didn't ask how they were doing. I didn't share stories from work. I kept my distance and told myself it didn't matter. I had my squadron. I had Captain Rinsato, who understood what it meant to be good at something your family would never value. I had Colonel Marissa Hayes, who looked me in the eye and said, "You've got command presence, Rowan. Don't waste it trying to convince people who aren't paying attention." I had my work, and my work was enough. But it wasn't enough to erase the ache. I wanted them to see me. Not the version of me they'd invented, the helpful daughter with the stable government job, but the woman I'd actually become. The officer who could walk onto a flight line and know exactly what needed to happen. The leader who could make decisions under pressure and live with the consequences. The airman who'd earned every rank, every certification, every salute. I wanted them to be proud of that woman. But I was beginning to understand they never would be. The patterns became clearer once I stopped pretending they'd change. My mother would call and ask about my schedule, then interrupt halfway through my answer to tell me about Eli's latest traffic stop. My father would ask if I was still doing that military thing, as if it were a hobby I might outgrow. They sent birthday cards addressed to our daughter, the Air Force Administrator. I stopped correcting the title. It didn't matter what I said. They heard what they wanted to hear. During one visit home, I wore my service dress uniform to a family dinner. It was fresh from the cleaners, ribbons aligned, rank insignia polished. My father glanced at me and said, "You really need to wear that to Applebee's?" My mother laughed, a little embarrassed, and said, "Harold, don't tease. She looks very official." Official. Not accomplished. Not decorated. Official, like a postal worker or a DMV clerk. I smiled, ordered a salad, and didn't bring up the fact that I'd just returned from briefing a joint task force on airfield vulnerability assessments in the Baltics. At that same dinner, my mother's friend Karen stopped by our table. She'd known me since I was in elementary school, used to give me her old Nancy Drew books. She looked at my uniform and said, "Oh, Hannah, look at you. Are you a stewardess now?" My mother laughed, actually laughed, and said, No, she works for the Air Force. Administration, logistics, that sort of thing." Karen nodded, satisfied, and said, "Well, that's wonderful. Steady work." I sat there, silent, while my mother erased every briefing, every deployment, every hour I'd spent earning the right to wear that uniform. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't cry. I just looked at myself and thought, they will never see you. Captain Rinsato was the first person who said it out loud. We were in the break room on base, drinking bad coffee after a 14-hour shift. I'd just gotten off the phone with my mother, who'd spent 20 minutes talking about Eli's new patrol route and hadn't asked a single question about my work. Rin looked at me and said, "They're not going to get it, Rowan. You know that, right?" I didn't answer. She continued, "You're expecting them to see what you see from the cockpit. But they're not in the cockpit. They're on the ground, looking up, and they've decided you're not really flying." It wasn't comforting, but it was true. I stopped waiting for them to ask the right questions. I kept my distance after that. I still sent money when they needed it, but I stopped explaining my job. I stopped inviting them to events on base. I stopped hoping they'd understand the difference between a second lieutenant and a major, between administrative work and intelligence operations. I built my life around people who knew what I did and respected the work. I focused on my squadron, my certifications, my mission briefs. I got promoted to captain, then to major. Each promotion felt like proof that I was doing something right, even if my parents couldn't see it. The promotion to major happened on a cold morning in March. The ceremony was held on the flight line, wind whipping across the tarmac, 50 people in attendance. Colonel Hayes pinned the oak leaves to my shoulders and said, "You've earned this, Rowan." "Well done." My squadron applauded. I felt the weight of the new rank, the responsibility that came with it, and for a moment I felt complete. Then I looked toward the back of the crowd and saw my parents standing there, hands in their pockets, looking bored. I'd invited them weeks in advance. I'd sent them the details, explained what the ceremony meant, told them it was important to me. They'd agreed to come, but only after my mother said, "I suppose we can make the drive. It's not that far." They arrived late, sat in the back, and spent most of the ceremony whispering to each other. I could see them from the corner of my eye, checking their watches, shifting in their seats. When it was over, I walked toward them, still feeling the new rank on my shoulders, still holding onto the pride of the moment. My father met me halfway, looked at the oak leaves, and said, "Major of paperwork, huh? Guess they give medals for filing fast now." The words hit me like a slap. Not because they were cruel, but because they were casual. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He genuinely believed that's what I did. My mother laughed, a nervous, appeasing sound, and said, "Harold, don't embarrass her." But she didn't correct him. She didn't say, "No, she's an intelligence officer. She briefs generals. She coordinates missions." She just stood there, smiling apologetically, as if my father's joke was a minor social misstep rather than the erasure of everything I'd worked for. I looked at Colonel Hayes, who was watching from a few feet away. She gave me a slight nod, the kind that said, "You don't owe them an explanation." I turned back to my parents, saluted them out of sheer muscle memory, and said, "Thank you for coming. I need to get back to my team." My mother started to say something, but I was already walking away. I didn't look back. I didn't wait for them to follow. I walked across the tarmac, past the aircraft, past the crew chiefs and loadmasters who knew exactly what my rank meant, and I felt something inside me go quiet. Not angry. Not sad. Just finished. That night, I sat in my quarters and stared at the oak leaves on my desk. I thought about all the times I'd tried to explain my work to my parents. All the times I'd sent them articles about Air Force intelligence operations, hoping they'd read between the lines and understand what I actually did. All the times I'd bitten back frustration when they reduced my career to office work. I thought about my father's joke, Major of Paperwork, and realized it wasn't a joke. It was what he believed. And nothing I said would ever change that. Ran found me an hour later. She didn't ask what happened. She just sat down, handed me a beer, and said, "You good?" I nodded. She said, "They don't deserve to see you in that uniform, Rowan. You know that, right?" I looked at her and said, "I know." And for the first time, I meant it. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was just done trying to convince people who had already decided who I was. My parents saw a secretary. The Air Force saw an officer. I knew which version mattered. The shift happened slowly, the way tectonic plates move, invisible until the ground finally cracks. I stopped calling home every week. I stopped sending updates about my assignments. I stopped trying to translate my world into language they'd understand. When my mother called to ask how I was doing, I'd say, "Fine. Busy." When my father asked if I was still in the Air Force, I'd say yes. I didn't elaborate. I didn't explain. I let them believe whatever they wanted to believe. Captain Rin Sato became my sounding board during that time. We'd sit in the squadron ready room after long shifts, drinking coffee that tasted like diesel fuel, talking about the things we couldn't say to anyone else. She told me about her own family, immigrants who'd sacrificed everything to get her through college, who were proud of her service, but didn't understand why she'd chosen the military over medical school. They see the uniform, she said, but they don't see the mission. They think I'm wasting my degree. I understood that. The gap between what we did and what our families imagined we did was unbridgeable. One night, after a particularly brutal mission brief, Rin looked at me and said, "You're never going to get their approval, Rowan. You know that, right?" I nodded. She continued, "So stop trying. Do the work. Be excellent. Let the work speak for itself. If they come around, fine. If they don't, you'll survive." It was the most pragmatic advice anyone had ever given me, and it settled something deep in my chest. I didn't need their approval. I needed to be good at what I did. Everything else was noise. I threw myself into the work. I volunteered for every complex assignment, every joint operation, every task force that needed an intelligence officer who could think 3 steps ahead. I spent weeks in Eastern Europe, coordinating reconnaissance missions with NATO allies. I briefed colonels and generals on threat assessments, supply chain vulnerabilities, enemy movement patterns. I learned to read terrain maps like poetry and satellite images like scripture. I became the officer people called when they needed someone who wouldn't flinch under pressure. The deployments were hard, long hours, high stakes, no room for error. But they were also clarifying. When I was overseas, coordinating missions, I wasn't Harold and Diana's daughter. I wasn't the girl from the small Midwestern town who was supposed to stay small. I was Major Rowan, call sign Reaper Zero, and I was good at what I did. The soldiers I worked with didn't care where I came from or what my parents thought. They cared whether I could get the job done. And I could. During one deployment, I spent 3 weeks embedded with an Army reconnaissance unit near the Polish border. We were tracking enemy supply movements, coordinating drone surveillance, feeding real-time intelligence to tactical units on the ground. It was exhausting work, 18-hour days, constant vigilance, decisions that could mean life or death for soldiers I'd never meet. But I loved it. I loved the precision, the responsibility, the weight of being trusted with something that mattered. I loved knowing that my work had consequences, that it wasn't theoretical or abstract. It was real. One night, sitting in a temporary command post, I received an encrypted message from Colonel Hayes. It was brief. "Excellent work, Rowan. You're being considered for 05. Keep it up." I stared at the screen, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, pure, uncomplicated pride. Not pride that needed validation from my parents or approval from people who didn't understand what I did. Just pride in the work itself. I was good at this. I had earned this. And that was enough. When I returned stateside, I didn't tell my parents about the deployment. I didn't explain where I'd been or what I'd done. When my mother asked if I'd been traveling for work, I said, yes, just some assignments. She didn't press for details. She never did. Instead, she spent 20 minutes telling me about Eli's promotion to detective. I listened, made appropriate sounds of approval, and felt nothing. No resentment. No anger. Just a distant, clinical understanding that we were living in different worlds, speaking different languages, and no amount of effort would bridge the gap. I started setting boundaries after that. When my parents asked for money, I sent it, but I didn't ask follow-up questions or offer additional help. When they invited me to family gatherings, I declined unless it was convenient for me. When my mother tried to introduce me to her friends as our daughter who works for the Air Force, I didn't correct her, but I also didn't engage. I became polite, distant, professional. I treated them the way I'd treat any casual acquaintance, with courtesy but without intimacy. Ren noticed the change. "You're quieter about them," she said one afternoon. I shrugged. "There's nothing to say." She nodded, understanding. "You're protecting yourself. That's smart." I didn't think of it as protection. I thought of it as survival. I couldn't keep bleeding for people who didn't notice the wound. The promotion to lieutenant colonel came 2 years later. I was 38 years old, stationed at Andrews Air Force Base, overseeing tactical intelligence operations for the Eastern Seaboard. It was a significant assignment, the kind that came with a security clearance so high I couldn't discuss most of my work even with other officers. I was responsible for coordinating intelligence between Air Force, Army, and Navy units, managing classified briefings, and advising senior command on operational threats. It was the job I'd been working toward my entire career, and I was good at it. I didn't invite my parents to the promotion ceremony. I didn't tell them it was happening. I didn't want to stand on another flight line, feeling proud and accomplished, only to hear my father make another joke about paperwork. I didn't want my mother to smile politely and then ask if I'd met anyone special. I wanted to experience the moment without their diminishment, without their inability to see what I'd built. So I didn't tell them. And it felt like freedom. The ceremony was small, dignified, attended by officers who understood what the rank meant. Colonel Hayes pinned the silver oak leaves to my shoulders and said, "You've earned every bit of this, Rowan." Well done. I thanked her, saluted, and felt the weight of the new rank settle onto my frame. It felt right. It felt like the culmination of years of discipline, sacrifice, and relentless confidence. And for the first time in my life, I didn't wish my parents were there to see it. Afterward, I called my mother to tell her about the promotion. She said, "Oh, that's wonderful, sweetie. What does that mean, exactly?" I said, "It means I'm a lieutenant colonel now." "Oh, 5. She paused, then said, "Well, that sounds very impressive. Your father will be so proud." But there was no weight in her words, no real understanding. It was the same tone she'd use if I told her I'd been promoted to assistant manager at a retail store. I thanked her, ended the call, and didn't feel disappointed. I felt nothing. And that, I realized, was progress. They visited Washington, D.C., 6 months after my promotion. My mother had been talking about the trip for weeks. She wanted to see the monuments, visit the Smithsonian, take photos in front of the Capitol. She mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that they'd stop by to see me. "Maybe we can grab lunch," she said. "If you're not too busy with your office work." I didn't correct her. I just said, "Sure. Let me know when you're in town." They arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I met them at their hotel, a mid-range chain near the National Mall. My father was wearing cargo shorts and a faded polo shirt. My mother had a fanny pack and a sun visor. They looked like tourists, which they were. I was in civilian clothes, jeans, and a base-issued jacket because I wasn't on duty and didn't feel like explaining the uniform. My father hugged me briefly and said, "You look good, kiddo. DC treating you well?" I said, "It's fine. Busy." My mother asked if I'd had time to explore the city. I said, "Not really. Work keeps me pretty occupied." We had lunch at a diner near the hotel. My father ordered a burger. My mother ordered a salad and spent most of the meal talking about Eli's new house. "He got a great deal," she said. 3 bedrooms, big backyard. "He's really settling down." My father added, "That's what you should be thinking about, Hannah. You're not getting any younger. Find a good guy, buy a house, start a life." I sipped my water and said, "I have a life, Dad." He laughed. "You know what I mean. A real life. Not just work." I didn't argue. I'd learned that arguments were pointless. They had a vision of what my life should look like, and nothing I said would change it. So I nodded, finished my sandwich, and asked if they wanted to see the monuments. My mother brightened. "Oh yes. I want to get pictures of everything." My father said, "As long as we're back by dinner. I don't want to walk around in the heat all day." We spent the afternoon at the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument. My mother took photos with her phone, asking strangers to take pictures of the 3 of us together. My father complained about the crowds and the humidity. I walked beside them, mostly silent, thinking about the mission brief I had to review that evening. My mind was already back on base, already running through logistics, already calculating timelines. I was physically present but mentally elsewhere, and I didn't feel guilty about it. As we walked back toward the parking lot where I'd left my government vehicle, my father noticed the SUV. It was a standard-issue Gov vehicle, black, with government plates and a Department of Defense decal on the windshield. He stopped, stared at it, and said, "That yours?" I said, "It's assigned to me, yes." He laughed, genuinely amused. "Your boss let you borrow that? That's pretty nice of him." I didn't respond. My mother said, "Harold, don't be rude. I'm sure Hannah has to drive it for work." My father shrugged. "I'm just saying, that's a nice ride for someone doing admin work." I unlocked the SUV and climbed into the driver's seat. They got in the back, still talking, still oblivious. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot, heading back toward base. I hadn't planned to bring them to Andrews, hadn't planned for them to see where I actually worked, but as I drove, I felt something shift. A decision crystallized, quiet and inevitable. They were going to see. Not because I needed their approval, but because I was tired of living in two worlds. Tired of letting them believe a version of me that didn't exist. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Colonel Hayes. "Need you at the tarmac ASAP. Urgent exfil mission. Reaper Zero requested." I glanced at the message, then at my parents in the rearview mirror. My father was looking out the window. My mother was checking her phone. Neither of them noticed the shift in my posture, the way my hands tightened on the wheel. I typed a quick response, en route. ETA 10 minutes. Then I changed course, heading toward the flight line. My mother looked up. "Where are we going?" "I thought you were taking us back to the hotel." I said, "Change of plans. I need to stop by the base for a minute." "Work thing." My father sighed. "Can't it wait? We've been walking all day." I said, "No, it can't." My tone was sharper than I intended, but I didn't soften it. This wasn't a request. This was happening. We arrived at Andrews 10 minutes later. I cleared us through security, flashing my ID at the gate. The guard saluted. My father noticed. "They salute you," he said, half joking, half confused. I didn't answer. I drove onto the base, past rows of aircraft, past hangars and maintenance bays, until I reached the flight line. I parked near the tarmac and turned off the engine. "Stay here," I said. "Behind the yellow line. Don't cross it." My mother asked, "What's happening?" I said, "Just stay here. You'll see." I got out of the SUV and walked toward the staging area. I could feel their eyes on my back, could imagine the confusion on their faces. But I didn't turn around. I kept walking, my stride even, my shoulders back, my mind already shifting into mission mode. The crew was waiting, loadmaster, pilots, ground support. They saw me coming and straightened. The crew chief stepped forward, holding a headset. "Ma'am, we're ready when you are. Reaper Zero incoming on your call." I nodded, took the headset, and gave the signal. The base loudspeaker crackled to life. "Reaper Zero incoming. Clear the tarmac." The sound echoed across the field, sharp and commanding, cutting through the ambient noise of engines and wind. Then I heard it. The rotors. Low and deep, growing louder, the unmistakable thump of a Black Hawk approaching. I felt it in my chest, the same way I'd felt it as a 7-year-old at the county fair, watching a C-130 pass overhead. But this time, I wasn't watching. This time, the helicopter was coming for me. The Black Hawk descended, rotor wash whipping across the tarmac, kicking up dust and noise. It touched down 20 feet in front of me, sleek and powerful, the side door already open. The crew chief jumped out, snapped to attention, and saluted. "Call sign Reaper Zero, ma'am. Ready for exfil." I returned the salute, calm and precise. "Copy that, Chief. Let's move." I glanced back toward the SUV. My parents were standing behind the yellow line, frozen. My father's face was pale, his mouth slightly open. My mother had one hand over her heart, the other gripping my father's arm. They weren't moving. They weren't speaking. They were just staring. I turned back toward the Black Hawk, climbed aboard, and took my seat. The crew handed me a headset. I put it on, adjusted the mic, and gave the pilot a thumbs up. "Reaper Zero, ready for departure." The pilot's voice came through the headset. "Roger that, ma'am. Lifting off in 10. The rotors increased speed, the noise building to a roar. Through the open door, I could see my parents still standing there, small and still against the enormousness of the base. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just looked at them, one last time, and then we lifted off. The flight lasted 40 minutes. We flew low over the Chesapeake, the water dark and rippled below us, the horizon streaked with orange and purple as the sun dropped. I sat in the jump seat, headset on, listening to the pilot and co-pilot coordinate with ground control. The mission was straightforward: extract a high-value asset from a classified location, transport to Andrews, minimal exposure. I'd done this kind of operation dozens of times. It was routine. But as we banked over the bay, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not adrenaline. Not tension. Peace. I thought about my parents standing on the tarmac, watching the Black Hawk lift off with their daughter inside. I thought about my father's face, pale and stunned, and my mother's hand pressed to her chest. I thought about all the times they dismissed my work, reduced it to something small and forgettable, and I realized I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt free. Free from the need to explain. Free from the weight of their expectations. Free from the silent, exhausting work of trying to be seen by people who refuse to look. The crew chief's voice crackled through my headset. "Ma'am, we're 5 minutes out from the LZ. Asset is secured and ready for transport." I acknowledged, checked my watch, and ran through the extraction protocol in my head. Everything was on schedule. Everything was controlled. This was what I was good at: precision under pressure, leadership without hesitation, the ability to make decisions and live with them. My parents would never understand this part of me, and that was fine. I didn't need them to. We touched down at the extraction point, a small airfield outside Annapolis. The asset was waiting, an intelligence officer from a foreign allied nation, mid-40s, carrying a single briefcase. I stepped out of the Black Hawk, shook his hand, and escorted him aboard. He thanked me in accented English. I nodded, professional and detached, and signaled the pilot. We lifted off again, heading back to Andrews. The entire operation took 12 minutes. Clean. Efficient. Unremarkable in the context of my job, but the kind of thing my parents would never know existed. As we flew back, I closed my eyes and let the rotor noise wash over me. I thought about Ren's words from years ago. You can't teach people to value you. You can only show them what you've built without their permission. I'd built a career. I'd built a reputation. I'd built a version of myself that was competent, respected, and necessary. And none of it required my parents' approval. That realization didn't come with anger or bitterness. It came with clarity. We landed back at Andrews as the sun disappeared below the horizon. The tarmac was lit with floodlights, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I stepped off the Black Hawk, handed my headset to the crew chief, and thanked the team. They saluted. I returned the salute and walked back toward the staging area. My parents' SUV was still parked where I'd left it, but they weren't inside. They were standing near the operations building, talking to a base security officer. When they saw me, they both straightened, their faces uncertain. I walked toward them, my stride even, my expression neutral. The security officer saluted me as I approached. I returned it and said, "Thank you, Sergeant. I'll take it from here." He nodded and stepped away. I stopped in front of my parents, hands at my sides, and waited. My father spoke first. "Hannah, he stopped, searching for words. We didn't know. We didn't know you did that." My mother's eyes were red, her voice shaky. "The soldier at the gate, he told us you're a lieutenant colonel. He said you run intelligence operations. He said people salute you." She paused, looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "Why didn't you tell us?" I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. "I did tell you. Multiple times. You just didn't want to hear it." My father flinched. My mother looked down. I continued, my voice steady, but not unkind. "You decided a long time ago what my job was. You decided I was doing paperwork, sitting at a desk, being a secretary in uniform. And no matter what I said, no matter what I showed you, you kept believing that. So I stopped trying to correct you." My father's voice was quiet. We thought you were exaggerating, making it sound more important than it was." I nodded. "I know. But I wasn't. This is what I do. This is who I am. And I'm good at it." My mother wiped her eyes. "We're proud of you, Hannah. We really are." I looked at her, weighing the sincerity in her voice. Are you? Or are you just surprised? The question hung between us. My mother didn't answer. My father looked away. I let the silence sit for a moment, then said, I need to finish my debrief. I can drive you back to your hotel after, or you can call a cab. Your choice. My mother said quickly, we'll wait. Please. I nodded. Fine. Give me 20 minutes. I walked into the operations building, filed my mission report, and signed off on the extraction. Colonel Hayes was in her office, reviewing satellite feeds. She glanced up when I entered. Good work tonight, Rowan. Clean up. I thanked her. She studied me for a moment, then said, Your parents still here? I nodded. She smiled slightly. Let them sit with it. They'll either figure it out or they won't. Either way, you did your job. I drove my parents back to their hotel in silence. My father sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window. My mother was in the back, her hands folded in her lap. When we pulled up to the hotel entrance, my mother leaned forward and said, Can we see you again tomorrow? Before we leave. I hesitated. I have a morning brief at 0600. I might not have time. She nodded, disappointed but trying to hide it. My father opened his door, then turned back to me. Hannah, I'm sorry. I didn't understand. I should have listened. I looked at him, this man who'd spent my entire life underestimating me, and felt something soften. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of it. I know, I said. But you need to understand something, Dad. I don't need you to be proud of me now. I needed you to be proud of me 10 years ago. I needed you to see me when it mattered. And you didn't. His face crumpled slightly. I continued, my voice gentler now. But I'm not angry anymore. I just need you to know that if you want to be part of my life going forward, you have to see me as I actually am. Not as you wish I was. He nodded slowly. My mother reached forward and squeezed my shoulder. We'll do better, she said. I promise. I didn't respond. Promises were easy. I'd wait to see if they kept them. They got out of the SUV and walked into the hotel. I watched them go, then drove back to base. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired and ready to be done with this chapter. They called 3 days later. My mother's voice was tentative, careful, the way someone speaks when they know they've crossed a line and are trying to find their way back. Hannah? Are you free to talk? I was in my office, reviewing intelligence reports, but I set them aside. For a few minutes. What's up? She hesitated. Your father and we've been talking. About what you said. About how we treated you. I waited. She continued, we didn't realize how much we'd hurt you. We thought we were being supportive, but we see now that we weren't. Not really. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Mom, I appreciate that. But I need you to understand something. It's not just about the support. It's about the respect. You never respected what I do. You never tried to understand it. And that hurt more than anything else. Her voice cracked slightly. I know. And I'm sorry. We both are. I closed my eyes. Okay, she said, we'd like to visit again. If you're willing. We'd like to see your world. Really see it. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect the space I'd built, to keep them at the distance I'd carefully maintained. But another part, smaller, quieter, wanted to give them one more chance. I'll think about it, I said. I need to see if you mean what you're saying. Words are easy, Mom. Actions are harder. She said, we understand. We'll wait. Just, don't shut us out completely. Please. I promised I wouldn't, ended the call, and sat in my office for a long time, thinking. Ren found me there an hour later. She took one look at my face and said, your parents. I nodded. She sat down across from me. What are you going to do? I shrugged. I don't know. Part of me wants to let them try. Part of me thinks it's too late. Ren tilted her head. Is it? I looked at her. Maybe. I'm not the same person I was when this started. I don't need their approval anymore. So what's the point? Ren was quiet for a moment, then said, the point isn't about needing their approval. The point is whether you want a relationship with them. Do you? I thought about it. Did I? I thought about my childhood, about my father teaching me to change a tire, about my mother braiding my hair before school. I thought about the people they used to be, before I became someone they couldn't understand. And I realized I didn't know. I don't know, I said honestly. Ren nodded. Then take your time. Figure it out. But don't punish yourself by keeping the door closed if you actually want it open. I took her advice. I didn't invite my parents back immediately, but I didn't cut them off either. I answered their calls. I responded to their texts. I let them exist in the periphery of my life while I figured out what I wanted. And slowly, over the course of several months, I noticed a shift. My mother started asking real questions about my work. She'd say, "What does an intelligence officer actually do?" And I'd explain, carefully, in terms she could understand. She listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't reduce it to something smaller. My father was slower to come around. He'd still make jokes sometimes, testing the boundaries, seeing if the old dynamic would snap back into place. But when I didn't laugh, when I responded with silence or a pointed look, he'd stop. Apologize. Try again. It was awkward and imperfect, but it was something. They were trying, in their clumsy, uncertain way, to see me. And that was more than they'd done in 20 years. 6 months after the incident on the tarmac, I invited them to base for a family day. It was a public event, designed to give family members a glimpse into military life, aircraft displays, demonstration flights, tours of the facilities. I didn't wear my dress uniform. I wore my flight jacket, rank insignia visible but not ostentatious, and I met them at the main gate. My mother hugged me tightly. My father shook my hand, then pulled me into a brief, awkward hug. "Thanks for inviting us," he said. I nodded. "Let's see how it goes." We toured the base together. I showed them the operations center where I worked, explained the intelligence briefings I conducted, introduced them to members of my squadron. Colonel Hayes stopped by, shook their hands, and said, "Your daughter is one of the best officers I've ever worked with. You should be very proud." My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father said, "We are. We really are." And for the first time, I believed them. At the flight demonstration, we stood on the tarmac and watched a pair of F-16s perform a flyover. The sound was deafening, the sight breathtaking. My mother gripped my arm, her face lit with awe. My father watched in silence, his expression unreadable. When the jets disappeared over the horizon, he turned to me and said, "Is this what you do? Coordinate things like that?" I shook my head. "Not exactly. I coordinate intelligence operations. But I work with the people who make flights like that possible." He nodded slowly. That's incredible, Hannah." We didn't fix everything that day. There were still moments of awkwardness, still gaps in understanding, still echoes of the old dismissiveness. But there was also something new, a willingness to try, to listen, to see me as I actually was rather than as they wished I'd be. And that was enough. Not perfect, but enough. As we walked back to the parking lot, my mother said, "Thank you for giving us another chance." I looked at her. "I'm not giving you a chance, Mom. I'm giving us a chance. If this is going to work, it has to be mutual. You have to respect me, and I have to let you in. Neither of those things is easy." She nodded. "We'll do our part." "I promise." I said, "I'll hold you to that." They drove back to their hotel that evening. I stood in the parking lot, watching their car disappear, and felt something I hadn't felt in years, cautious hope. Not certainty. Not confidence. Just the quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, we could build something new from the wreckage of what we'd been. It wouldn't be the relationship I'd wanted as a child, when I thought their approval was everything. But it might be something real, something earned, something built on honesty rather than illusion. And that, I thought, was worth trying for. Over the next year, we rebuilt slowly. My parents visited twice more, once for Thanksgiving, once for a weekend in spring. The visits were easier each time. My mother learned to ask follow-up questions. My father learned to listen without interrupting. They started to see the person I'd become, not just the daughter they'd imagined. And I started to see them differently too, not as obstacles or disappointments, but as people who'd been limited by their own understanding, their own fears, their own inability to imagine a world bigger than the one they knew. I still kept boundaries. I didn't share classified information. I didn't invite them to every event. I didn't let them back into the center of my life. But I let them stand at the edges, watching, learning, trying. And that felt like enough. Ren noticed the shift. "You seem lighter," she said one afternoon. I shrugged. "Maybe. They're trying. I'm letting them. We'll see if it sticks." She smiled. "That's progress." I nodded. It was. The real test came 2 years after the tarmac incident. I received orders for a deployment, 6 months in the Middle East, coordinating intelligence operations for a joint task force. It was a significant assignment, the kind that could define a career. It was also dangerous, though I couldn't tell my parents the details. When I called to let them know I'd be out of contact for a while, my mother's voice went tight with worry. "How long? Where are you going?" I said, "I can't tell you where. 6 months, maybe longer. I'll send emails when I can, but they'll be infrequent." There was a long pause. Then my father's voice came on the line. They'd put me on speaker. "Hannah, is this dangerous?" I hesitated. I could lie, reassure them, tell them it was just another desk job. But that would undo everything we'd built. So I told the truth. "It could be. But I'm trained for this. I'll be careful." My mother made a small sound, somewhere between a sob and a gasp. My father said, "We're proud of you, kiddo. You know that, right?" I felt my throat tighten. "I know, Dad. Thank you." The deployment was hard. Long hours, constant pressure, decisions that carried real weight. But I was good at it. I coordinated intelligence between Army, Navy, and Air Force units. I briefed generals on enemy positions. I identified supply chain vulnerabilities that saved lives. I did the work I'd been trained to do, and I did it well. And when I had rare moments of downtime, sitting in a tent at a forward operating base, I'd think about my parents. About the way my father's voice had cracked when he'd said he was proud. About the way my mother had cried when I'd told her the deployment might be dangerous. They weren't perfect. But they were trying. And that mattered. I came home in early spring. My parents met me at the airport, standing at the arrivals gate with a handmade sign that read, "Welcome home, Lieutenant Call Rowan." My mother was crying before I even reached them. My father hugged me hard, his voice rough. "Good to have you back, kiddo." I hugged them both, feeling something shift inside me, not forgiveness, exactly, but something close. Acceptance, maybe. The understanding that people could change, could grow, could learn to see what they'd been blind to. It wasn't fast. It wasn't easy. But it was real. We had dinner that night at a restaurant near base. My mother asked careful questions about the deployment, nothing classified, just general curiosity about what life had been like, what the conditions were, how I'd handled the stress. I answered honestly, sharing what I could. My father listened, occasionally interjecting with comments that showed he'd been reading about the region, trying to understand the context of my work. It wasn't perfect. He still got details wrong. My mother still asked questions that revealed how much she didn't understand. But they were trying. And I was letting them. At the end of the meal, my father cleared his throat. "Hannah, I need to say something." I looked at him, wary. He continued, "I spent most of your life not seeing you." "Not really. I saw what I expected to see, what I wanted to see. And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I made jokes when I should have been paying attention. I'm sorry I waited until you were standing next to a damn helicopter before I realized who you really are." His voice broke slightly. "But I see you now. And I'm proud. Not just of your rank or your job, but of the person you are. The woman you became, even when we didn't support you. Especially because we didn't support you." I felt tears prick my eyes. I blinked them away. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot." My mother reached across the table and took my hand. "We love you, Hannah. We always have. But we're learning to love the real you, not the version we invented. And that's better. Harder, but better." I squeezed her hand. "I love you too. Both of you. And I'm glad we're figuring this out. We didn't fix everything that night. There were still scars, still moments of miscommunication, still echoes of the years they'd spent not seeing me. But we were building something new. Something honest. Something that didn't require me to shrink or perform or explain. They were learning to see me. I was learning to let them. And that felt like enough. 2 years later, I stood in a briefing room at the Pentagon, preparing to present intelligence findings to a joint task force that included two-star generals from 3 branches. I was 41 years old, still a lieutenant colonel, still called Reaper Zero by the people I worked with. I'd been offered promotion to full colonel twice and turned it down both times. I liked where I was, close enough to the operational work to stay sharp, senior enough to have real influence. I wasn't chasing rank anymore. I was chasing excellence. The briefing went well. I presented satellite imagery, threat assessments, and strategic recommendations with the same calm precision I'd honed over 2 decades. The generals asked hard questions. I answered them without hesitation. Afterward, a Navy Rear Admiral stopped me in the hallway and said, "That was exceptional work, Colonel. If you ever want to transition to joint operations permanently, let me know." I thanked him, filed the compliment away, and moved on to my next meeting. Praise was nice, but the work was what mattered. That evening, I attended an award ceremony on base. Colonel Hayes was retiring after 32 years of service. She'd been my mentor, my advocate, the person who'd taught me that leadership wasn't about being loud or aggressive. It was about being steady, confident, and trustworthy. As she gave her retirement speech, I thought about all the women who'd come before me, who'd fought to be taken seriously in a world that didn't want to see them. I thought about the ones who'd made space for people like me, who'd refused to shrink, who demanded respect and earned it through sheer force of will. I owed them everything. After the ceremony, Hayes found me near the reception table. "Rowan, walk with me." We stepped outside, into the cool evening air. She lit a cigarette, a habit she'd kept hidden for years, and exhaled slowly. "You ever think about what comes next?" I shrugged. "Sometimes. But I'm not in a hurry." She nodded. "Good. Don't be. You've got time. But when you're ready, think about command. You'd be good at it." I looked at her. "You think so?" She smiled. "I know so. You're one of the best officers I've ever worked with. You're smart, you're steady, and you don't let ego get in the way of the mission. That's rare." I thanked her. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the flight line. Then she said, "Your parents came to the ceremony tonight. Did you see them?" I turned, surprised. "They're here." She nodded. "In the back. They didn't want to bother you, but they wanted to see you in your element. They asked me to tell you they're proud." I felt something warm spread through my chest. "They told you that?" Hayes smiled. "They did. And I told them they should be. You're a hell of an officer, Rowan. They're lucky to have you as a daughter." I found my parents afterward, standing near the parking lot, looking slightly out of place among the uniforms and military personnel. My mother saw me first and waved. I walked over, still in my service dress, ribbons catching the last light of day. My father looked at me and said, "You looked good up there, kiddo. Professional." I smiled. "Thanks, Dad." My mother added, "Colonel Hayes spoke so highly of you. She said you're one of the best." I shrugged. "She's biased. But I appreciate it." We stood there for a moment, the 3 of us, and I realized how far we'd come. They were here. They'd driven 3 hours to attend a retirement ceremony for an officer they'd never met, just to see me in my world. They'd asked about my work, listened to the speeches, tried to understand the significance of the event. They were trying. And that was enough. My father cleared his throat. "Hannah, your mother and I were talking. We'd like to come visit more often. If that's okay with you. We'd like to be part of your life. Really part of it." I looked at him, this man who'd spent so many years not seeing me, and felt something settle. "I'd like that," I said. "But I need you to understand something. This is my life. The uniform, the work, the deployments. This is who I am. And if you're going to be part of it, you have to accept that. No more jokes. No more dismissiveness. Just respect." He nodded. "We understand. And we're sorry it took us so long to get here." My mother wiped her eyes. "We wasted so much time, Hannah. So much time not seeing you." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "You're seeing me now. That's what matters." She smiled through her tears. My father said, "We're proud of you, kiddo. Really proud." I believed him. As I drove back to my quarters that night, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The years of invisibility. The deployments that had shaped me. The tarmac incident that had forced my parents to see what they'd been ignoring. The slow, painful rebuilding of a relationship I'd thought was broken beyond repair. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been clean. But it had been real. And that was what I'd always wanted, not perfection, just honesty. I thought about the girl I'd been, 7 years old, watching a C-130 fly overhead and feeling something lock into place inside her. That girl had wanted to fly. She'd wanted to be powerful, competent, respected. She'd wanted to matter. And now, more than 30 years later, she did. Not because her parents had finally seen her, though that helped, but because she'd built a life that mattered, with or without their approval. She'd become the woman she was always meant to be. And that was enough. The next morning, I reported for duty at 0600. I briefed my team on upcoming operations. I reviewed intelligence reports. I coordinated with allied forces. I did the work I'd been trained to do, the work I was good at, the work that made a difference. And when I stepped onto the flight line that afternoon, watching a Black Hawk lift off for a training exercise, I felt the same thing I'd felt as a child, that deep, rattling certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Captain Sato found me there, standing near the tarmac, watching the aircraft climb into the sky. She stood beside me, arms crossed, and said, "You ever think about retiring?" I laughed. "Not yet. I've still got work to do." She nodded. "Good. The Air Force needs more people like you." I glanced at her. "People like me?" She smiled. "People who don't quit. People who build something even when no one's watching. People who prove that respect isn't given, it's earned." I thought about that. About all the years I'd spent earning respect, building credibility, proving I was more than what people assumed. About the tarmac, and the Black Hawk, and the moment my parents finally saw me for who I really was. About the slow, imperfect work of rebuilding a relationship that had been broken for so long. About the woman I'd become, not despite them, but without them. And I realized Rin was right. You can't teach people to value you. You can only show them what you've built without their permission. They once saw a secretary. I became the woman they salute from the flight line. It took them 20 years to understand the difference, and by the time they did, I no longer needed them to. That's the thing about earning your own respect. Once you have it, everyone else's approval becomes optional. My parents visit twice a year now. They come to base family days, ask careful questions, listen when I explain my work. My mother sends care packages when I'm deployed. My father emails articles about Air Force operations, asking if I was involved, if I can talk about it. They're trying to know me, and I'm letting them, but the relationship we have now is different from what they wanted and different from what I once needed. It's built on honesty instead of expectation, on respect instead of obligation. It's smaller than what we could have had, but it's real. And real is better than perfect. I still send money when they need it, but now they thank me differently. They don't dismiss it as coming from some vague government job. They acknowledge what it represents, that I've built a career that provides not just for me, but for them. That I've succeeded in ways they never imagined possible. My father told me once, late at night over coffee during a visit, "I didn't think women could do what you do." I know that's wrong. I know that now. But that's what I believed, and I'm sorry. I accepted his apology, not because it erased the years of dismissal, but because it was honest. And honesty, I've learned, is the foundation of everything that matters. Colonel Hayes retired to Virginia. She calls every few months, checking in, offering advice when I ask for it. She told me once that the hardest part of military life isn't the deployments or the danger, it's the isolation. You do work no one understands, she said. You make sacrifices no one sees. And you have to be okay with that, or it'll destroy you. I understood what she meant. For years, I'd wanted my parents to see my sacrifices, to understand what I'd given up, what I'd built. But I'd learned that validation from people who don't understand your world is hollow. Real validation comes from doing the work well, from the people who work alongside you, from the knowledge that you've made a difference even when no one's watching. Captain Rin Sato got promoted to major last year. We still grab coffee when our schedules align, still talk about the things we can't say to anyone else. She's married now, 2 kids, balancing motherhood and military service with the same calm confidence she brings to everything. Her parents came to her promotion ceremony. They brought her children, took photos, asked questions. She told me afterward, they still don't really get it, but they're proud. That's enough. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. I've stopped chasing promotion. I turned down Colonel twice because I like where I am, close enough to operations to stay engaged, senior enough to have influence. I coordinate intelligence for joint task forces, brief generals, advise on strategic operations. I've spent time in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, the Pacific. I've worked with allies from a dozen countries, earned their trust, built relationships that matter. My call sign, Reaper Zero, has become something of a legend in certain circles, not because I'm flashy or dramatic, but because I'm reliable. When Reaper Zero is on the mission, things get done right. That's the reputation I've built, and it's the one I'm proud of. I'm 43 now. I've spent 21 years in the Air Force, most of them proving I belonged here. I don't have to prove it anymore. The people I work with know what I can do. The officers I brief trust my assessments. The enlisted personnel I lead respect my decisions. I've built something solid, something that doesn't require constant defense or explanation. I've built a life that makes sense to me, even if it never made sense to my parents. They came to base last month for an air show. My mother wore a shirt that said, "Proud Air Force Mom." My father wore a cap with Lieutenant Colonel rank insignia on it. They stood on the flight line with other military families, watching the demonstration, and when a Black Hawk flew overhead, my mother grabbed my arm and said, "Is that one of yours?" I smiled. Not today. But I've been in ones just like it. She squeezed my arm, her eyes bright with something I'd spent years wanting to see, genuine pride, not manufactured, not performative. Real. After the show, we had lunch in the dining facility. A young airman approached our table, stood at attention, and said, "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you. You briefed our unit before our last deployment. Your intel saved lives." I thanked him, told him to stay safe, and watched him walk away. My father stared at me. "That happens a lot?" I shrugged. "Sometimes." He shook his head slowly. "I had no idea, Hannah. I really had no idea." I looked at him. "I know, Dad. But you do now. That's what matters." I think about the tarmac sometimes. About the moment the Black Hawk landed and my parents finally saw me. About the look on my father's face, pale and stunned, and my mother's hand pressed to her chest. About the way I'd boarded that helicopter without hesitation, without drama, without needing their approval. That moment was a turning point, but it wasn't the end of the story. The end of the story is quieter, smaller, built over years of slow, imperfect rebuilding. It's my mother asking real questions about my work. It's my father apologizing clumsily but sincerely. It's me learning to let them in without needing them to complete me. I've learned that family is complicated. That love doesn't always look like understanding. That people can fail you for years and still find their way back. That forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, it's about deciding what you want the future to look like. I've forgiven my parents, not because they earned it quickly, but because holding on to anger was exhausting. I chose to let them try. I chose to believe they could change. And they did, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. That was enough. Last week, I received orders for another deployment. 6 months, location classified, high-priority intelligence operations. When I called to tell my parents, my mother cried. My father's voice was steady but strained. "Be safe, kiddo. Come home." I promised I would. My mother said, "We'll be here when you get back. We'll always be here." I believed her. Not because she'd always been there, she hadn't, but because she was trying to be now. And that was worth something. I'm writing this from my quarters the night before I deploy. Outside my window, I can see the flight line, aircraft lined up under floodlights, ready for tomorrow's missions. I can hear the distant sound of engines, the low hum of activity that never stops on a military base. This is my world. This is where I belong. And whether my parents understand it or not, whether they ever fully grasp what I do or why it matters, I know. I know what I've built. I know what I've sacrificed. I know what I'm capable of. And that knowledge is enough. They once saw a secretary. I became the woman they salute from the flight line. You can't teach people to value you. You can only show them what you've built without their permission. And if they come around, if they learn to see you, that's a gift. But if they don't, you'll survive. You'll more than survive. You'll thrive. Because the work matters more than the recognition. The mission matters more than the applause. And the woman you become in the pursuit of excellence matters more than anyone's approval. Another Black Hawk will lift off tomorrow, and I'll be on it. Headset on, mission briefed, ready to do the work I was trained for. My parents will worry. They'll pray. They'll wait for my emails and count the days until I come home. And that's enough. Not perfect. Not what it could have been if they'd seen me sooner. But real. Honest. Built on a foundation of hard-earned respect and slow, imperfect growth. I look at my reflection in the window, calm, resolute, free. I see the woman I've become, the officer I've earned the right to be, the leader people trust when the stakes are high. I see Reaper Zero. And I'm proud of her. Not because anyone told me to be. Not because I finally got the approval I'd been chasing. But because I know, without question, that I've built something that matters. Something that will outlast recognition, outlast approval, outlast everything except the work itself. That's enough. That's everything. Thanks for writing with me. If this hit home, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a boundary win today. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been dismissed by family until reality proved them wrong? What happened? What boundary did you set, and did it stick? If you got that Black Hawk moment, would you rebuild trust or keep your distance? Why? What's one way you're earning respect on your terms this year? Drop your story in the comments, tell me where you're watching from, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Stay sharp.